Hi students, we're going to continue to talk about culture today and cultural diffusion and some of the different processes that exist when cultural diffusion takes place. So in your textbook in chapter 4, you will read about the different ways in which culture can spread from a hearth of origin outward. So typically, in old times, before we had global communication processes, you could have a very predictable spread of a cultural component like agriculture or urbanization, as we've looked at in previous units, from a central hearth outward in predictable patterns based on the transportation highways and communication pathways that were usually very slow back in the day, as you young people say. But today, in a world where globalization is characteristic of the communication patterns, the trade, the economic relationships, the innovation, the interdependent nature of the countries and the nations of the world, globalization creates a much broader pathway for cultural components to be spread and shared, adopted, rejected, resisted, any of those verbs that we've used in previous lectures to talk about how cultural components like habits, beliefs, traditions, even language patterns, symbolism, how do these things change from one place to the next? So through globalization, I've got some of the things, and I just rattled these off a minute ago when I was telling you about it, but globalization is technically a word that we use to refer to that interdependent and interconnectedness that has come from global capitalism, really. I mean, it has a lot to do with the idea of trade, and that interdependence is maybe this country has a climate that can produce foods that we all like to eat, and because we have these huge industrial complexes that create transportation pathways, these huge ships that weigh I don't know how many tons that come from China to the shores of the United States and transport all of those things through air or trucking or any of the ways that we transport goods from one place to the next. We can go to our grocery store here in central Arkansas, which really doesn't have easy access to the sea, easy access to oceans. You can go down the river through the dam system to the Mississippi that doesn't have a dam system, into the Gulf of Mexico, and then down and out and around, and thank heavens for the Panama Canal, or that trip would have been much longer down around the tip of South America. But globalization and the transportation and the instantaneous communication that can happen means that global influences are everywhere, even in those local cultures that sometimes try to resist influence by global corporations or processes that some see as a threat to local heritage, local social identity, and diversity in general. So there are processes that we look at in cultural geography that are kind of like resistance, but also somewhat assimilation practices that occur with culture contact. And since globalism means so many more pathways for global contact, we have a word that we use in cultural geography. Many disciplines use this word, however, glocalization. So please look at the combination here of the word local and global. So this is a combination of the word global and the word local. Glocalization. It's a process through which some of these modern cultural components that we come in contact with, no matter how remote or how isolated our local landscape used to be, we have a lot of contact through globalized communication methods and transportation methods, the interconnectedness that we have. Arkansas is one of the major rice producers of the world. We have rice trade with the Philippines and Japan and China. So there's a whole lot of globalism all around us, but how have local cultures incorporated or altered? Sometimes the resistance to pure global culture or modern culture comes from localizing some of the aspects of those cultural components. So glocalization is altering, modifying or altering components of modern culture that a local culture is in contact with to morph it and change it so that it has a local flavor and it maintains a local identity. Now, I mentioned that many different disciplines use the word glocalization. I'm thinking in particular of business marketing and business planning because a lot of corporations want to be global, right? Because they want to make money from as many populations as possible. And so one of the go-to examples in a business class about how glocalization can be intentionally implemented from the top down, which that's not what we're talking about here. Here with glocalization, really the alteration and modification to those modern cultural components that people have access to or learn about because of global processes, really the glocalization in that context happens from the community upward. Okay. But in the business world, and so I'm telling you this because I don't want you to Google something like if you're Googling, an outside source for a reaction paper this week, for instance, or if you're completing Project 3 and I ask you about glocalization on Project 3, don't Google any sources because you might you probably will come up with like a business model kind of explanation of glocalization rather than the one that we're using in cultural geography class. So here's a standard example of glocalization from the top down in the business model. McDonald's is used as an example very often in textbooks, in blogs, in YouTube videos, whatever you look up. McDonald's is a corporation that is as global as it gets. I mean, there's still a few nations of the world that reject McDonald's entirely. Libya in North Africa comes to mind. There's not a McDonald's there. Several other countries also don't allow that kind of influence in their country. However, McDonald's wants to be in every single country that they can be, but the business model, McDonald's in the United States, thrives on the beef offerings that are part of the menu. I mean, there have been some diversification of menu offerings lately in McDonald's. I think they even have a kale and quinoa salad in some places that you can order at McDonald's. However, if you think about the staples like the Big Mac or the quarter pounder with cheese, cheeseburger, these kinds of things, the managers of McDonald's have to localize the menu as they go into different places in the world. For instance, kosher preparation requires, not just kosher preparation, but kosher offerings requires that cheese and dairy do not come in contact with or get stored with any sort of meat product. So if you have milkshakes, if you have cheeseburgers on a typical USA McDonald's menu, to glocalize it for Israeli menus, you must omit cheeseburgers. You must ensure, kosher preparation of the milkshakes and make sure that there are complete and totally separate storage facilities for these kinds of things. Or if you are a McDonald's executive and you want to transition into the market in India, where the eating of beef is prohibited on a religious level, then you can't offer any of those beef things to begin with. You'll have to get alternatives like a veggie burger, for instance, or some sort of product that is similar to meat that or similar to the original signature offering, but the local consumer will accept it and allow the restaurant to be successful. So that kind of use of the word glocalization in a business model is like top-down glocalization, where people who want to capitalize on the customs and traditions, habits, etc. of the local people study those culture, traditions, habits, etc. of the local people and make modifications to their offerings so that the target market responds. And so that's a top down. Sometimes language can be included also. So for instance, in cultures that have a dominant Islam as the dominant religion in an area, if you have something that the United States would call a hot dog on your menu, dogs are something called haram in Islam. It means forbidden, it means dirty, it means disgusting, it means keep them away. And so they're definitely not anything that you can eat, and you don't even really have them as pets or think of them as anything other than, they're similar to a pig. Now, some people in the United States have pigs as pets, but typically if you see them on the farm, they're considered, at first sight to be like really dirty animals. They eat dirty things, they do dirty stuff, and so they are, in Islam, forbidden. Haram. You shouldn't have them. And so not only can you not have pork be included as an ingredient in a hot dog, you also will never sell anything that has the word dog in it if it's supposed to be consumable. So you have to come up with a different name to market for these many different parts of the world that have Islam as the dominant religion, because it affects micro-scale decisions in life. So glocalization in a cultural geography sense, we want to look at how the people in the locale alter or modify themselves. They alter or modify the effects of or influences of modern or popular culture when they come in contact with it, so that they can maintain their local flair, maybe take advantage of or participate in, whatever phrase you want to apply to it, participate in modern cultural aspects while not losing their local or social identity that has become part of their heritage. So, glocalization, please make sure if you do any research on this past what's in the textbook or what's in this video, please be very critical about what you're consuming online, because it might be talking about the top-down kind of stuff rather than the bottom-up kind of stuff that we want to use this word correctly when we're talking about it in cultural geography class. Okay, we've got 1 or 2 more videos to go. Let me make sure that you are aware. I'm not sure if I said this at the beginning of the video, but the information this week, so everything from week 9 where we start on chapter 4 and we start talking about culture and cultural diffusion, you need really good notes on this and really, clear access to those pages in your textbook and the index to look up other things in your textbook from other chapters to include, because you've got project 3 coming up. You've got a good 2 weeks to work on it. It's going to spread out for a good 2 weeks. So I wanted to go ahead and give it to you, so those of you who want to work on it in advance can do so. But those of you who want to take your time, you got 2 weeks to do it. So it's going to open up soon, and please watch for it in Blackboard, and make sure, if you've only just been listening to these videos as you drive along in the car, make sure that you give yourself some more time to go home and really take some good notes from the skeleton I've got on the board, stopping it and adding in some of the further details that I provide when I'm rattling stuff off for you in the videos. Text me with questions. I'll see you again soon. We've got more to talk about week 9.